So, now that I can finally record it, I'm currently in a tier 32 dungeon. I would like to show you my Bone Spirit Necromancer. You're going to notice one big thing. I recently swapped over to Bone Prison from Blood Mist. I'm trying that out for the first time here. I just need more essence generation after the nerfs from the most recent patch, so that's why it's on there real quick. Let me go ahead and just run a lot more of this dungeon so you can kind of see it. I'll go over my gear, my Paragon points, my stats, my aspects, all of that. I'll have timestamps down to everything down below. But there you go. You're going to get better gameplay. And I now know why there was a render issue with my video editing software. I apologize for that. It just couldn't handle Diablo 4, so I had to fix that. So it's all resolved now. But let's go ahead and get into it. The rotation for the build is pretty simple. We want to basically always try to be near 100% chance to crit, and then we walk up and we blow up stuff like that. And then when everything comes out, we use Miasma Corpse Explosion to clear up monsters that are kind of like weaker and we don't really care about. That also gets us our essence regeneration back. And then we want to get another big pack of monsters, get them all here, get them with the corpse tendrils, pop them all up, and then explode them. The reason why we have added on the Bone Prison is because Bone Prison does two things for us. One, well, it technically does three things. It acts as a little bit more of crowd control, so we can proactively cast it like that to generate essence and fortify and set up monsters in an area before we do our big old Bone Spirit Explosion. And it gives us another source of fast essence generation, because again, we were just nerfed in the most recent patch, so it's no bueno. The only problem is that it's not nearly as strong as Corpse Tendrils, because Corpse Tendrils gets us our crit chance. And right now on our build without Corpse Tendrils, we're only at around 50% chance to crit. But you walk up and you kind of rinse and repeat. You try to get the biggest packs that you possibly can, because your Bone Spirit is going to be on cooldown for 6 seconds. So you need to be able to survive monsters while that's happening. Here we have monsters in a big area. Again, so that was without Corpse Tendrils. We didn't have pure crit chance there and crit damage. And then that one's with Corpse Tendrils. So you can see the difference. One shots most things. The other one does an okay job. Bang. And then you walk through. So this is right now the strongest build that the Necromancer has available to it. Kind of bar none. When you have all of your damage bonuses up, before I had swapped over to Bone Prison, I did have to take a couple points out of damage on the skill tree. We would be one-shotting the bosses at the end of these. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna very quickly get through the rest of this, and then I'm going to actually show you the boss fight as well, since you get the idea of like the pretty typical rotation already. Bang! That's the idea. You walk up, Corpse Tendrils for the crit chance, wait for it to deal a damage, put on your bone, and then you... Ooh! We almost one-shot the boss. Hold on. Die! Alright, so we two-shot the boss on that one. We got pretty close. We're missing a little bit of our damage multipliers there because we had to swap over to Bone Prison because of the nerfs. But that's the concept. You 1-to-2 shot. What tier was this? This was tier 32? Blind Burrow, with a boss that's typically pretty difficult to handle, especially if you don't have a lot of great unstoppable effects. But that's the Bone Spirit Necromancer. Now let's very quickly talk about the skills that you're using and the rotation, just because I already touched on it a little bit, but I want to go into slightly more detail. Reap is on the bar literally to create a corpse. We want to create a corpse because we want to cast Corpse Tendrils. We want to cast Corpse Tendrils because our biggest total multiplier is from Grasping Veins. This gets us 40% chance to crit for 6 seconds. And 120% multiplicative bonus critical strike damage to enemies who are damaged by Corpse Tendrils. This is by far the biggest scaler that you can get for your overall damage, and that's why it's so important. You don't use this to generate essence at all. That's what we use Corpse Explosion for. The problem being that they nerfed how much essence we can generate with Corpse Explosion, but this also helps to stack on a lot of additional just benign shadow damage that is applying a ton of crowd control, because our real essence generation is coming from Umbral. So we use the Corpse Explosion to add on a little bit of damage, a ton of CC to proc Umbral a whole bunch. So that generates us all of the essence that we need in between the 6-second cooldown of Bone Spirit. Corpse Tendrils is for all the great CC and the huge damage modifier. Bone Storm, damage reduction, as well as 20% chance to crit while it's up. That's how we get up to 100%, even though they have nerfed Serration. And then again, we are currently using Bone Prison. Bone Prison says that when it hits a target, get us 15 essence and then +5 per target hit. It also fortifies us. And since Necrotic Carapace, which is in your skill tree, is currently bugged and doesn't work off of hewed flesh, this is our only means of generating Fortify on Bone Spirit. So it's survivability, it messes with monster AI a little bit, and it gets us a ton of essence. We are also using Bone Prison spawns Blight underneath it. We put 3 points into Blight because we want to get the slows targets, which is additional CC to get essence even faster, and immobilization, which is also CC, which gets us even more essence faster. You could go with the you deal more damage if you feel like your essence generation is fine, and then it basically says Bone Prison is another 15% multiplicative modifier on top of everything else, which would be great. Now, let's look at the skill tree in its entirety, and I'll try to not bloviate too much here. Reap to generate the corpse, down into Blight for the crowd control for Umbral, 3 points into hewed flesh so that our corpse explosions generate more corpses, generates us more essence, allows us to use that as a mana battery. Maxing out corpse explosion damage so that in case Bone Spirit is down, we can clean up a fight or finish off a fight just with corpse explosions so we can maintain our essence total. We're using Miasma to make it a shadow skill. You used to use Blood Mist, and I'll let you know that if you don't specifically build for survivability on your gear, you are going to feel losing Blood Mist. So keep that in mind. If you don't want to deal with that, keep Blood Mist on the bar and deal with the fact that Bone Prison won't be an option for you. 1 point into Bone Prison, I have 4 points from my gear that helps to reduce its cooldown. The life on the Bone Prison really doesn't matter. It does mess with AI, like I said, and then generating us essence and also fortifying. We don't need it to generate vulnerable. We already have corpse tendrils. 3 points down into Grim Harvest, and then I would like to have 1 point into Fueled by Death, since this is just another multiplier from when we inevitably cast Bone Spirit, but I have +2 points from gear, so I don't need it as much. Actually, I have multiple points into Corpse Tendrils here, because we do want that cooldown to match up with Bone Spirit's cooldown as close as possible, because every time I cast Bone Spirit, I want to be able to cast Corpse Tendrils. This is off by about a second, it's as close as we can get it. Enhancement, obviously, and then Plagued applies Vulnerable. If you're using Blood Artisan's Cuirass, you'd be using the Blood Orb version of it. Right now, my survivability isn't there. I can't just like support wearing that armor because it gives you almost no survivability. I have a ton of damage reduction on my chest piece right now, and I think for me personally, it is much better. Once you have a perfect Umbral, and once you have better survivability on the rest of your gear and crit chance, you can optimize this build a whole bunch. Be able to put on Blood Artisan's Cuirass, be able to generate a lot more Blood Orbs, and then you can also use that as a mana battery, but there's this weird tipping point that I don't think I'm quite there yet, especially with the nerfs recently. So we're using this for Vulnerable to get that additional final multiplier for our crit damage at the end of the damage calculation. Max Bone Spirit. Bone Spirit has crit chance. Now that I'm using Bone Prison, I don't need this to generate me essence. Before that, I was using this and just sometimes missing out on critting 5 to 10% of the time, and it felt terrible. So I'm glad that we're able to put this back on and get back up to 100% chance to crit. We have the 1 point into Crippling Darkness, so that Corpse Explosion now applies crowd control to trigger Umbral for us. Also, survivability. 3 points into Serration for crit chance. Massive nerf here. Just 1 point into Compound Fracture. You might be asking yourself, like, why wouldn't you max this out? And it's just because you cast Bone Spirit once every 6 seconds. So there's literally never a point where I can actually benefit from this as it stands right now. Once you're on Blood Artisan's Cuirass and you're able to pump out more than 1 Bone Spirit per 6 seconds, that would be fine, but this does not help us in any way. 3 points into Avulsion for the increased critical strike damage against vulnerable targets, since we are using Vulnerable on Corpse Tendrils. Then only 1 point into Rapid Ossification. Turns out, Rapid Ossification does not reduce the cooldown of Bone Spirit. I'm not exactly sure why. I assume it looks at like essence spent on skill, but since all essence is spent immediately, it doesn't calculate its cooldown reduction. I don't know what it is, it just doesn't work. So it does nothing. I only have 1 point here because it does slightly increase the speed of our Bone Storm being up more readily available, and I like that. That's important to me. Honestly, I think you could take this point out and dump it into damage somewhere. 3 points into standalone for survivability, 3 points into memento mori to get the most out of our sacrifice bonuses for our skeletons, ossified essence because obviously, Bone Storm because you need this on your build, and then realistically I would like to have even more points into Inspiring Leader. It cannot be overstated just how valuable increased attack speed is on the build. It increases the rate that we generate essence from Corpse Explosion and the rate that we're able to dump out both our Bone Prison, our Corpse Tendrils, and our Bone Spirit in those really tight scenarios where it's like either I one-shot them or they one-shot me. I would love to have 2 more points in this. For the gear, we already talked about it, but big two-handed sword, crit damage, intelligence, damage to injured enemies, which is the least valuable role on it, but it helps to speed out kill time whenever our Bone Spirit doesn't one-shot. And then 75 all stats gets us base skill damage as well as crit chance. And then the massive grasping veins on this, I got a perfect roll and I waited to have a really good sword. And then I'm also using damage against crowd controlled enemies. On our boots, +4 to Corpse Tendrils, +3 to Bone Spirit. It's not a perfect roll, but it's not going to get better than this unless I re-roll it. Massive movement speed bonus, and then evade grants a massive movement speed bonus, and then also intelligence for that base skill damage. Shielding Storm, this gives us double survivability by generating barrier whenever we use our Bone Storm, and that's just huge. Then the +4 ranks to Corpse Explosion, damage reduction, damage after killing an elite, and additional ranks to Bone Prison for, again, the additional cooldown reduction. Howl from Below makes it so that our corpse explosions are like double effective in generating essence because we're going to gain that stun chance as well as that fear chance, which both count as CCs. Also increases corpse skill attack speed so that we generate essence more quickly by consuming corpses, and then lucky hit so that we generate corpses more effectively as well. And then on top of that, it is a nice little damage boost to the corpse explosion itself, and also helps to keep the corpses moving with us so the next fight is even more effective than the fight before it. Armor says plus to damage, damage reduction, damage reduction. I would love to reroll the darkness skill damage. I think this armor is like close to good enough for us to consider it our forever armor, and I would like to reroll the darkness skill damage. And then imprinted on right now, I just have a random survivability that says as we deal damage, we gain armor. Armor is going to add on flat damage reduction, and this is a close to perfect roll for the disobedience aspect, but I would like to put something else onto here eventually, or ultimately replace it with Blood Artisan's Cuirass. And then the helmet that we were using for Blood Artisan's Cuirass is life on kill, maximum life, dex, crowd control duration on a helmet. I would like to get maximum essence on this, so I'd probably reroll the life on kill, but that might be really good if we ever get Temerity, which I would consider using. So I might reduce the crowd control duration for maximum essence. And also I'm leaving the corpse summons a blood orb on this for when we do swap over to Blood Artisan's Cuirass, but for right now I'd also like to put some other survivability tool on here. Amulet is like kind of subpar as a sacred amulet, but it rolled pretty well. 2 to corpse skills, 2 to fueled by death, cooldown reduction as well as total armor, and then we put our ossified essence aspect onto that for additional crit damage. Big ring, damage to injured, crit with bone skill, critical strike chance, and lucky hit chance with a 3 roll on Umbral. I'm probably never going to replace this ring. This might be my forever ring. And then for our other ring, damage to stun, damage to close, critical strike with bone, and damage to injured. And then the Bone Prison spawns Blight underneath it. The reason why that's so important is because we also want to get Blight pulls in targets, so that Bone Prison is another pixel pull on top of Corpse Tendrils, which I would ultimately put onto my boots. Right now our boots say sometimes kind of generate a bit more essence, and I don't think that that's important enough to not have the Blight pull, which would be a lot stronger. And then skulls in all of your jewelry, since that generates armor. We're already a Necromancer, we have a ton of intelligence, so we have a ton of elemental resistance. We need physical damage reduction here. And then the armor, I'm using rubies for max life. Once I can actually generate fortify, hopefully when they fix necrotic carapace, I would swap this over to damage reduction while fortified, because we should basically maintain 100% like fortify all of the time. I'm not reliant enough on Bone Prison right now to say yes, I have enough fortify. I think ultimately I might swap over, but at least for right now I know that maximum life will increase the chances of me living, so that's good enough. For the Paragon tree, building into Prime, building into Preservation, and building into Knowledge, I have control here for the additional damage versus crowd control, and then in addition to that, any monsters that are slowed or chilled and or stunned or frozen take additional multiplicative damage from us. We get all of that from Corpse Tendrils. I'm building into Flesh Eater first. This is a huge damage multiplier to make sure that our Bone Spirit is one-shotting as often as possible. Building into Stifle, which isn't as good as it used to be back before I wasn't one-shotting stuff. But again, if I don't one-shot, it helps to clean up the fight a lot. But that critical strike damage is nice. We have damage to elites, as well as erudite for the resistances, and then we dropped Gravekeeper into here. Because of the big nerf, this used to say plus 200%, now it only says plus 100%, but it also gets us that additional damage for every close corpse, and we are constantly surrounded by corpses, so this is still, I think, the best option as far as total damage output is concerned, but it definitely got hit a bit and you can kind of feel it. You'll also see that they nerfed attack speed on rare nodes, but I do think picking up the 3 points here for attack speed is absolutely worth it still. Then we build over into Scent of Death. Scent of Death is great because it says if you have corpses near you, you have damage reduction, which means when the fight starts, you have damage reduction. And then it says when you don't have corpses near you, you gain increased damage, which means that when you start off a fight, you get more damage. So better chances of one-shotting on bosses, and then better survivability when you are farming the elites in your dungeon. Building into Ruin for damage to healthy, that's absolutely what we want, and then critical strike damage increases one-shot potential. Then we're also building into damage to injured as well as armor. The armor is just great for survivability, and then damage to injured helps to clean up fights. I was also going to build into the second damage to injured, but I don't actually think that these are optimal for the build. I'm still messing around with the fact that I'm not always one-shotting, so they're valuable to me, but I think on the optimal build, they're probably not worth building into. And I would instead want to build straight to the glyph socket and then also pick up the survivability over here. And then I think that this becomes more valuable at that point, but I might even be reconsidering kind of the entry of this entire board and instead go to Bone Graft on my third board. I do think that Bone Graft is a little bit of a trap early on. Everybody, well, of course it says bone skill stuff, but all of these say just straight up additive bonuses, and they don't specifically look at bone skills, meaning that they also help our corpse explosion. And at least earlier on, you're definitely still relying on that for a lot of cleanup. But that's how I currently have my board set up. I'm only level 72 and I have almost all of my renown. I'm missing 4 Paragon points from renown, so that's the farthest that we can get into the boards at this point. I still think that Bone Spirit is absolutely the strongest build for the Necromancer. I do think that Blood Artisan's Cuirass has a use later on in the build once you have enough survivability and crit to be able to warrant putting on an armor that basically just says its aspect and plus ranks to Bone Spirit, because the rest of the stats are kind of trash. If you had Deathless Visage, I would also use this on the helmet because it is the best damage output in an easiest to find form, because that plus to maximum essence does so much work now, especially with the Serration nerf that they put into place. And do I think that this drops a tier or anything like that because of the nerfs? Not really. All of the S tier builds have all dropped much more significantly than Necromancer, and I think that this is absolutely still the best use case for the strongest skills that we have available to us. So I hope that that helps. I try to put everything into it and also include the gameplay because I know a lot of people are looking for that. I hope that you're enjoying Diablo 4. If you have better optimizations, or if you have cooler ideas, or if you found different ways of building it, please let me know down in the comments. We're trying to build the best builds possible, right? I also have Bloodless Scream available to me, and I just kind of don't like losing all of the damage from not using a two-handed sword, but let me know if you've had better time with that, if you're able to slot in more damage because you don't have to worry about essence generation. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.